Jen and Tony, you're on deck. And I would like to welcome Mark to the mic. There you are. Welcome.
Hi, everybody. Today I'm going to read from a friend of mine. She wrote a book called Exposed, and she has a muscular problem, but it's not a downer because she's really courageous. And that's why I wanted you to know her story. She calls the book Exposed, and it's her memoir. 2 months ago I read something from it, and I don't know if you were here, so they liked it, so I hope you like it too. Okay? So I'm going to start reading chapter 1. For so long, I couldn't help but think that I've been living a dream, that if I pinched myself hard enough, I'd finally wake up and realize that during the past several years of my life, I had fallen into a deep, long sleep. Maybe I accidentally had a head trauma and been in a coma without realizing it. Of course, something as simple as getting out of bed or getting dressed, both of which I'm sure most people don't think twice about, catapults me back into harsh reality and reminds me that in fact I am very much awake. These two things are only a few of the many obstacles and challenges I face, and I have faced every day of my life since I became sick at the age of 2.5. Hospitals became like a second home to me for most of my early childhood years, though I never considered them to be a home away from home. I despised the smell of the antiseptic hallways. I hated the so-called healthy, nutritious meals that tasted like cardboard and were prepared and delivered to my room 3 times daily by an old elderly lady wearing a bland color uniform and a hairnet. I abhorred the doctor who came to check on me every day with a dozen residents trailing behind him and who surrounded my bedside in a semicircle, trapping me like a caged animal. After the brief formalities and the quick, "How are you doing today, Ms. Luong?" I became the poster child for my illness, which is dermatomyositis. I literally became their illustration, and for the next 15 to 20 minutes I was talked about as if I was no longer in the room. Certain body parts were pointed out for emphasis on an explanation. 12 pairs of eyes peered closely at me, and there was nothing I could do except to sit there on display like some Greek statue at a museum. There were times where I wanted to roll my eyes and tell them straight out that even with their use of medical jargon, I did understand what was being discussed. But of course, I did no such thing. Instead, I sat there in the middle of my bed like a good little patient, a small fake grin pasted on my face, and let them think I was too young to understand what was going on. Even when the nurses came to draw blood every other day, leaving my arms black and blue, I would grin and bear it all bravely. It wasn't until after the muscle biopsies, one on my right arm and the second on my right thigh, that the doctors eventually figured out that I had dermatomyositis. I remember waking up in the middle of the biopsies and crying when I didn't see my mom around and instead saw a group of people behind white masks hovering over me. I remember one of the nurses picking me up and holding me close, trying to calm me down. After a few minutes, I was laid back on the table, and the last thing I remember was the big black rubber mask coming down, covering my nose and mouth. When I woke up from the anesthesia, I was back in my hospital room with Mom seated next to my bedside. The 2 places where they did the biopsies itched and looked raw and bloody. The stitching was crooked and jagged like someone had sewn in a hurry. Mom told me I couldn't touch them because they would get infected. The one on my arm eventually healed, leaving only a faint scar, but the one on my leg never quite healed right. The cause of my illness is unclear, but it's theorized that it's an autoimmune disease in which the body's immune system attacks the muscles and tissues, resulting in an inflammation of the muscles and the skin. It's not contagious, and it can't spread from person to person, nor is it directly inherited, although some genetic factors may increase susceptibility. The disease, which was somewhat short and relatively severe onset, affects both adults and children. Females are more affected than males. The illness is characterized by a patchy bluish-purple discoloration on the face, neck, shoulders, upper chest, elbows, knees, knuckles, and back. Some patients may also develop hardened bumps of calcium deposits under the skin. The most common symptom is muscle weakness, usually affecting those muscles that are closest to the trunk of the body. Eventually, people who have this disease have difficulty rising from a sitting position, climbing stairs, lifting objects, or reaching overhead. Occasionally, the muscles ache and are tender to the touch. Some have weight loss or low-grade fever. I started to develop all these symptoms by the age of 2.5. and now she's in her 30s. My neck muscles at one point got so weak I could hardly hold up my head when sitting or standing. Treatment generally consists of prednisone, the steroid drug, which was using about 14 or 15 years old. By then I was seeing my third rheumatologist and my disease had pretty much burned out. The prednisone never did much for me except make me irritable, cause constant nosebleeds which lasted for hours and dry out my joints. Mom had been telling the doctors that the medication wasn't working, but none of them listened. They all felt they knew better. Finally, when I started seeing Dr. Lawson, he decided to take Mom's word and slowly weaned me off the prednisone. My nosebleeds became less frequent and I was less irritable. Once I was diagnosed with the disease, my parents and I wanted answers. The search for the unknown cause of this disease became an obsession. For years I blamed it on my nanny. I don't know if she ever had an American name, but for the sake of telling the story, I will refer to her as Mrs. Poon. It was our theory for many years that she was the one responsible. We didn't understand why this was happening and desperately wanted answers, so it was often easier to make up the answers or blame someone else. I will never forget living at her house with her family and the things that were done to me. I see the skepticism and even doubt written on the faces of those whom I've shared my story. I know they think that I've exaggerated my story because it doesn't make sense. But life doesn't have to make sense. Fiction does. Deep inside, I know that she's not fully to blame for my disease, though what was done may have contributed to it in some ways. She quotes, "Hate doesn't destroy the other person, it destroys you. And an eye for an eye only leads to more blindness." So this is her book. She wrote it 10 years ago, and she's still going strong. So she's courageous. And I wanted to sing a song of courage, The Impossible Dream. You may know it from Anna La Mancha, 1972. I'm doing this without music, so bear with me. To dream the impossible dream, to fight the unbeatable foe, to bear the unbearable sorrow, to run where the brave dare not go, to right the unrightable wrong, and to love pure and chaste from afar, to try when your arms are too weary, to reach the impossible dream. This is my quest, to follow that star, no matter how hopeless, no matter how far, to fight for the right without question or pause, to be willing to march into hell for that heavenly cause. And I know if I'll only be true to this glorious quest, that my heart will lie peaceful and calm when I'm laid to my rest. And the world will be better for this, that one man, scorned and covered with scars, still strove with his last ounce of courage to reach the impossible dream.